The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom as 300 guests raised their champagne flutes in honor of my brother David's wedding. The bride, Amanda, looked radiant in her designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, and David stood beside her in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, every inch the successful investment banker he'd worked so hard to become. I smoothed down my simple black dress, purchased off the rack at a department store, and tried to blend into the background near the wedding party table. As the maid of honor's sister and David's only sibling, I had been assigned a seat at the head table, but I felt distinctly out of place among the other guests, who seemed to be competing for who could wear the most expensive jewelry or discuss the most exotic vacation destinations. Ladies and gentlemen, David's voice boomed through the microphone as he prepared to give his speech. The room gradually quieted, conversations dying down as attention focused on the happy couple. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the most important day of my life. I'd heard David practice this speech 3 times over the past week, so I knew what was coming. Still, I felt my stomach clench with familiar dread as he reached the part about family. I want to thank my parents for their unwavering support, he continued, gesturing toward Mom and Dad at table 2. They taught me the value of hard work and perseverance, and they never stopped believing in my potential. Mom beamed with pride, her hand resting on Dad's arm. They'd flown in from Phoenix for the wedding, and I could see how much this moment meant to them. Their successful son marrying into a prominent family, surrounded by influential friends and colleagues. I also want to acknowledge my sister Alina, David said, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. She's still trying to figure life out. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. Around the room, I could see guests turning to look at me with expressions ranging from polite sympathy to barely concealed pity. David's tone suggested I was some kind of charity case, a family obligation to be mentioned briefly before moving on to more important matters. Alina's always been the dreamer in our family, he continued with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. While I was focused on building a career, she's been chasing various projects. We're all hoping she'll find her direction eventually. The patronizing way he said projects made my life's work sound like finger painting or creative writing exercises. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as 300 strangers absorbed this assessment of my character and prospects. But that's what family is for, right? David concluded. Supporting each other through all of life's phases. Here's to Alina. May she find her path soon. The room erupted in polite applause, and here calls while I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like I'd just been publicly diagnosed with some kind of chronic failure condition. I managed a weak smile and raised my glass slightly, playing my assigned role as the family disappointment who was grateful for everyone's patience. What David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while he'd been climbing the corporate ladder at his investment firm, I'd spent the last 6 years developing artificial intelligence algorithms that were quietly revolutionizing multiple industries. My projects had generated over $500 million in licensing fees, and my latest patent had just closed the largest AI licensing deal in corporate history. But explaining machine learning and neural networks to a family that still called everything technology-related computer stuff had proven impossible. After years of having my work dismissed as playing around with computers, I'd stopped trying to bridge that gap. The truth was, I'd deliberately kept my success hidden. Part of it was security. The AI field attracted corporate espionage and unwanted attention from competitors. But part of it was simpler. I was tired of being misunderstood by people who thought real success only came in forms they could easily recognize and categorize. So I lived quietly in my modest apartment, drove a reliable car, and let my family believe I was still figuring things out, while I built an empire they couldn't see. Alina. Amanda's voice cut through my thoughts. Come take some pictures with the family. I dutifully joined the group photos, standing slightly apart from David and Amanda while the photographer captured the moment for posterity. Smile bigger, Alina. The photographer called out. This is a celebration. I stretched my mouth into what I hoped looked like genuine happiness, while internally calculating how long I'd need to stay before I could politely escape. These family gatherings had become endurance tests, exercises in how much casual humiliation I could absorb while maintaining a pleasant demeanor. Alina, sweetheart. Mom appeared at my elbow during a break between photo sessions. I was just talking to Amanda's mother about you. I braced myself for whatever well-meaning but mortifying conversation was about to be recounted. She mentioned that her friend's company is looking for administrative assistants. Mom continued cheerfully. Good benefits, regular hours. Very stable. I told her you'd be interested. Administrative assistant. After 6 years of building cutting-edge AI systems, my mother thought I'd be interested in filing paperwork and answering phones. The gap between perception and reality was so vast, it felt like science fiction. That's thoughtful, Mom. But I'm actually pretty busy with my current work. Your current work, she repeated with that particular tone she used when she was trying to be supportive, but clearly didn't believe what she was hearing. Alina, honey, you can't keep waiting for something perfect to come along. Sometimes you have to take what's available and build from there. The irony was suffocating. I wasn't waiting for something to come along. I'd already built something extraordinary. But because it didn't look like the traditional career paths my family understood, it might as well have been invisible. I'll think about it, I said, because that was easier than attempting another explanation that would fall on deaf ears. The evening progressed with more of the same. During dinner, I sat quietly while the other guests discussed their jobs, vacation homes, and children's achievements. When someone asked what I did for work, I'd learned to say, I work in technology, and change the subject quickly before the conversation could turn into another opportunity for helpful career advice. Technology is such a broad field, commented Mrs. Richardson, Amanda's aunt. Are you in sales? Customer service? Research and development? I answered carefully. Oh, how interesting, she said in the tone people use when they're being polite, but have no idea what you're talking about. My nephew works for Apple. Such a stable company. I nodded and smiled, letting the conversation drift elsewhere. There was no point explaining that my algorithms were powering recommendation systems for companies like Apple, or that my patent portfolio was licensing to every major tech firm in Silicon Valley. Mrs. Richardson wanted to hear about a nice, comprehensible job with a recognizable company name, not abstract concepts like machine learning architectures. By the time they started clearing the dinner plates, I was mentally composing my exit strategy. I'd stay through the cake cutting, dance with David once during the father-daughter dance portion of the evening, and then slip away before anyone could corner me with more career suggestions. But then Amanda's father, Robert Morrison, approached our table with his phone in hand and a puzzled expression on his face. Robert Morrison was the CEO of Morrison Technologies, one of the largest software development companies on the West Coast. I knew this because I'd been following his company's work for years. They were exactly the kind of firm that could benefit from my AI innovations, though they didn't know I existed. Excuse me, he said, his eyes focused on me with sudden intensity. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask, are you Elena Vasquez? Every conversation at our table stopped. Mom looked confused, David raised an eyebrow, and Amanda turned to see what had captured her father's attention. Yes, I said carefully, my heart starting to race. Elena Vasquez, who holds the patents on adaptive neural network architectures for real-time data processing. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could feel my family's eyes on me, could sense their confusion deepening into something approaching alarm. Yes, I said again, quieter this time. Robert's face broke into a wide grin. My company just licensed your AI patent portfolio for $200 million. We've been trying to reach you through your legal representatives for weeks. I can't believe you're here. The silence that followed was so complete. I could hear the ice melting in water glasses 3 tables away. David's mouth was hanging open. Mom had gone very pale. Amanda looked like someone had just told her the wedding cake was made of cardboard. 200 million? David's voice cracked on the numbers. Actually, it's part of a larger licensing agreement, Robert continued, completely oblivious to the family drama he just unleashed. The full package is closer to $350 million over 3 years, but the AI patents are the crown jewels. Alina, your work on predictive modeling is revolutionary. We're estimating it'll increase our processing efficiency by 400%. I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. After years of careful secrecy, my professional life had just collided with my personal life in the most public way possible. Alina. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. What is he talking about? Before I could answer, Robert was pulling out his phone. I have to introduce you to our CTO. He's been studying your research papers for months. Do you mind if I call him? He's going to lose his mind when he finds out you're at my daughter's wedding. Research papers? David said faintly. Oh yes. Alina's published extensively on machine learning applications, Robert explained, his enthusiasm building. Her work on autonomous decision-making algorithms is required reading in graduate AI programs. NIT has been trying to recruit her for a faculty position. Each revelation hit my family like a separate earthquake. I could see them struggling to reconcile this new information with their fundamental understanding of who I was and what I'd been doing with my life. NIT wants to recruit her. Mom repeated, like she was testing whether the words made sense. Among others, Robert confirmed. Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley. Every major tech program in the country wants Alina on their faculty. But she's too valuable in the private sector. The licensing fees from her patents probably exceed most university budgets. Licensing fees, David said slowly, like he was learning a new language. Alina, I hope you don't mind me asking, Robert continued, but are you considering any new partnerships? Because Morrison Technologies would love to discuss an exclusive development contract. We're talking about the kind of money that could fund a small country. The conversation was spiraling completely out of control. In the space of 5 minutes, I'd gone from being the family disappointment to being courted by one of the most powerful executives in the tech industry, and my family was witnessing every moment of it. That's something I'd need to discuss with my legal team, I managed to say. Of course, Robert nodded enthusiastically. Here's my direct number. Have your people call my people, and we'll set something up. Alina, it's such an honor to meet you. Your work is going to change everything. He shook my hand with both of his, like I was some kind of celebrity, then hurried away to tell his wife about this amazing coincidence. The table remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Alina, David finally said, his voice very different from the patronizing tone he'd used in his speech. What just happened? I said carefully, I need to explain some things. You think? Mom's voice was rising. Alina, That man just said you sold patents for $200 million. What patents? What are you talking about? I looked around the table at my family's faces, confusion, shock, and something that might have been betrayal. They'd spent years thinking they knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of, and that certainty had just been shattered in the most public way possible. I've been working on artificial intelligence research. I began developing algorithms that help computers make decisions and process information more efficiently. For 6 years, David said, and it wasn't a question. While we thought you were unemployed, you were developing artificial intelligence. I wasn't unemployed, I said quietly. I just wasn't employed in a way you recognized. But $200 million, Mom said weakly. People don't just give you $200 million for computer programs. They do with those programs can save companies hundreds of millions in processing costs. I explained. My algorithms can analyze market data, predict customer behavior, optimize supply chains, detect fraud. They have applications across dozens of industries. And you never told us, David said, his shock starting to transform into something sharper. You let us think you were struggling. Let us worry about you. Let me. He stopped, apparently remembering his toast and how it must have sounded to 300 people who now knew his lost sister was one of the most successful AI researchers in the country. Let you what? I asked. Let me talk about you like you were some kind of failure. He finished quietly. The accusation hung between us, and I realized this was the conversation I'd been avoiding for years. How do you explain to your family that you hid your success because they'd made it clear they wouldn't understand or value it? David, I said carefully, do you remember when I tried to tell you about my first patent application? His brow furrowed. When? 3 years ago, at Christmas. I was excited about it, and I started explaining what I'd discovered about neural network optimization. You said it sounded complicated and asked when I was going to get a real job. I could see the memory hitting him, could watch his face change as he recalled the conversation from his perspective. To him, it had been a brief exchange about incomprehensible technical details. To me, it had been an attempt to share the biggest achievement of my career. Mom, I continued, remember when I got my first licensing check? I wanted to take everyone out to dinner to celebrate, but you said we shouldn't celebrate until I found steady employment. Mom's hand went to her throat. Oh God, Alina, how much was the check? $50 million. The number fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock across the table. $50 million wasn't playing around with computers. It was the kind of success that redefined everything. Alina. Dad's voice joined the conversation for the first time. He'd been quiet throughout the revelations, but now he looked at me with something approaching awe. Are you saying you've been a millionaire this whole time? Multimillionaire, I corrected gently. The patents have generated over $500 million in licensing fees so far. $500 million, David repeated numbly. And that's just the existing patents, I added. I have 12 more applications in the pipeline, and 3 of them are for breakthrough technologies that could be worth billions. The scope of what they were learning seemed to be overwhelming their ability to process it. For years, they'd worried about my future, offered career advice, suggested entry-level positions, and generally treated me like someone who needed their help to navigate the professional world. Meanwhile, I'd been operating at a level of success they hadn't even known existed. But why? Mom asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us? It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer revealed uncomfortable truths about our family dynamics. Because every time I tried to share something I was excited about, It got dismissed, I said as gently as I could. Every breakthrough, every achievement, every opportunity. You found reasons why it wasn't real or reliable or worthwhile. We were trying to protect you, Dan said quietly. I know, I replied. But the effect was that I stopped trying to explain what I actually did for work. After a while, it was easier to let you think what you wanted to think. David was staring at his hands. Alina, do you realize what this means? You're not just successful. You're one of the most successful people I know. More successful than anyone at this wedding. Including you, I said, because it needed to be said. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of respect, embarrassment, and something that might have been pride. Yeah, he said quietly, including me. The revelation was starting to sink in around the room. I could see other guests glancing in our direction, probably wondering what Robert Morrison had said to cause such a dramatic shift in our table's dynamic. Some of them had clearly overheard parts of the conversation, and I could see whispered discussions starting at nearby tables. Alina. Amanda spoke for the first time since the bombshell dropped. I'm so sorry about what David said in his speech. If we'd known. It's okay, I said, and I meant it. You couldn't have known something I never told you. But I should have known, David said firmly. I'm your brother. I should have paid more attention, asked better questions, listened instead of assuming. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Alina, Mom said suddenly, your apartment. You said you lived simply because you preferred it. But we thought it was because you couldn't afford anything better. I can afford anything I want, I said simply. I just don't want much. The work is what matters to me, not the lifestyle. And that's why we never understood, Dad said with sudden clarity. We were measuring your success by external markers, job titles, salary, possessions. But you were building something entirely different. Revolutionary AI technology. Robert Morrison's voice rejoined our conversation as he returned to the table with his wife and Tal. Alina, I hope you don't mind, but I had to tell Margaret about this incredible coincidence. She's been following your research in the journals. Margaret Morrison, a distinguished woman in her 60s, extended her hand with genuine enthusiasm. Ms. Vasquez, it's such an honor. Your paper on adaptive learning algorithms was brilliant. We've been discussing it in our graduate seminars for months. You teach? I asked. Computer science at Stanford, she confirmed. And I have to tell you, our students are fascinated by your work. Would you ever consider guest lecturing? I know it's presumptuous to ask at a wedding, but the opportunity is too good to pass up. Stanford, one of the most prestigious technology programs in the world, wanted me to lecture to their graduate students. My family was witnessing yet another validation of work they'd spent years not understanding. I'd be honored, I said, and meant it. As the evening progressed, more people approached our table. Word had apparently spread that Amanda's new sister-in-law was some kind of AI genius. And everyone wanted to meet the mysterious researcher who'd been hiding in plain sight. A venture capitalist offered to fund my next startup. A defense contractor asked about government applications. 2 professors from different universities extended research collaboration invitations. By the time they started serving cake, I'd collected more business cards than I could count. And through it all, my family watched with growing amazement as person after person treated me with the kind of respect and deference usually reserved for Nobel Prize winners or Fortune 500 CEOs. Alina, David said during a quiet moment between introductions, I owe you an apology. You don't. Yes, I do, he interrupted. I spent tonight telling 300 people that you were lost and directionless. Meanwhile, you've been building something I can't even comprehend. I'm ashamed of myself." "David." "No, let me finish," he said firmly. "I've been condescending to you for years, offering advice you didn't need, treating you like you needed my help to figure out life. And all this time, you were operating at a level I'll probably never reach." It was a generous admission, especially from someone who'd built his identity around being the successful sibling. "What I don't understand," he continued, "is why you put up with it. Why didn't you ever tell me to shut up and mind my own business?" I considered the question seriously, because you're my brother, and I knew you meant well. You wanted me to be successful and secure. You just had a different definition of what that looked like. But weren't you angry? Frustrated? Sometimes, I admitted, but mostly I was just sad that we couldn't connect about something that was so important to me. "We can connect now," he said with sudden intensity. "I want to understand what you do, what you've built. Will you teach me?" It was perhaps the first time in our adult lives that David had asked me to teach him something. "I'd like that," I said. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Robert Morrison approached one final time. "Alina, I know this is incredibly presumptuous, but would you consider joining Morrison Technologies as our Chief Innovation Officer? We're prepared to offer a compensation package that would make you one of the highest-paid executives in the industry." I could feel my family holding their breath, waiting to see how I'd respond to an offer that represented the pinnacle of corporate success. "That's very generous," I said carefully, "but I prefer working independently. However, I'd be happy to discuss consulting arrangements or licensing additional technologies." Of course, Robert nodded. "Independence is important."